Good afternoon. Welcome to our weekly class. Today, because it's Hanukkah, we'll be discussing Hanukkah. It's not too late. It's the 6th day of Hanukkah, but we have 8 days, so we're still in the middle of this holiday. And this seems to be a problem over here. I don't know why it's doing this. It's disconnecting and then connecting again. Since Hanukkah is an 8-day holiday, I'd like to discuss 8 points of Hanukkah. 8 different points. Number 1, there's a misconception that Hanukkah is a minor holiday. Every myth has a kernel of truth in it, so it's probably based on the fact that unlike, let's say, Passover or Rosh Hashanah, where there are restrictions, we're not allowed to do certain kinds of work, Hanukkah has no such restrictions. Hanukkah is like a regular weekday in terms of our activities. But in that case, you can call it a minor holiday. But in terms of its spiritual meaning and significance, Hanukkah is anything but a minor holiday. And let me just share a few insights about it. This goes back 3,300 years, when the Mishkan, the first sanctuary, the portable sanctuary, was dedicated. The leader of every tribe would bring a special offering as a way of dedicating the temple. But one tribe was left out of this, the tribe of Levi, and its leader, Aaron, Moses' brother, was despondent. He was upset that he was left out of it. He was not told to be part of the leadership of the Jewish people to bring these dedication offerings. And God says to Moses to tell Aaron, don't worry, you have a more important role. You will light the menorah. Well, in what way is lighting the menorah greater than the offerings? So Nachmanides, one of the great commentators, the Torah, 13th century Rabbi, explains that whereas the offerings ceased with the temple's destruction, the lighting of the menorah did not cease, because even though we don't have the temple and we don't light the menorah in the temple, every one of us lights the menorah for Hanukkah. Hanukkah lighting is an extension of, a continuation of the lighting of the menorah in the temple. So in that sense, Hanukkah is more important than all the offerings which cease with the temple's destruction, and Hanukkah menorah and the Hanukkah light continues to shine brightly. But it goes even beyond that. The Midrash tells us that in the Messianic age, all the holidays will pale in comparison to Hanukkah. What does that mean? Let's say take Passover. Passover is about the Exodus from Egypt. Great miracles. The miracles of the future and the freedom that we will enjoy is so much greater than what happened in the Exodus. So the celebration of the Exodus will still be there, but it'll be like lighting a candle in daylight. The candle has the same light that it has at night, but you don't really appreciate it as much because you have daylight. But the exception to that rule is Hanukkah. Hanukkah will shine brightly and be observed prominently even in the Messianic age. Why is Hanukkah so special? Because Hanukkah lights are not conventional light. Yes, these are candles that we use or oil that we use, but it represents a spiritual light that is not conventional. It's not like any other light, because it's based on a different dimension, a different quality of light. And this is based on the fact that on the first day of creation in Genesis, the first thing that God says, Yehi Or, let there be light. And by the way, the word light there, the first time it appears in the Torah, is the 25th word of the Torah. Hanukkah is on the 25th day of the month of Kislev. That's a little hint over there. That light was not sunlight, because the sun was not put into orbit until the 4th day of the week. And yet there was light the first day. So our sages tell us that that light was a completely different kind of light. It was a physical light, but it was not just physical, it was spiritual. And they give an example of what its properties were, that with that light, you were able to see from one end of the world to the other. But it's more than just seeing the other side of the world. We have that now today. We call that television. We call that the internet. You can be in one place and see what's going on in China. But it was much more than just that. It was a spiritual light that enabled you to see reality the way reality really is. We don't see reality. If you ask a physicist, I'm looking at this table, what is a table? They'll tell you the table is nothing. There's nothing there. It's all atoms and subatomic particles. It's all energy. We don't really see reality, and even the physicist doesn't see reality because he only sees one dimension of the physical world. There's much more to the world than just the physical appearance. Even in terms of what a picture shows you, if you look at a picture, what do you see? You see one slice of an event and only one dimension of that event. You don't know what's happening before or after. The famous analogy given is he blindfolds someone from a third world country, and you bring him into a building and you take off the blindfold and he sees a bunch of masked people with knives in their hands, and there's some hapless individual tied to a table. And what does the person think? These must be murderers who are ready to kill that person. The problem was he didn't see the sign that said hospital, an operating room. This is a surgery, a life-saving surgery. The problem is not that his eyes are not adequate. The problem is that the eyes are inadequate because you only see one slice of what's going on, but you don't even know what's going on beneath the surface. The light that was created on day one was a spiritual light that enabled you to see reality the way reality really is. Because we have different definitions of reality, but the ultimate reality is beyond us. Chanukah represents the reintroduction of that light. We get a glimpse of it, we get a taste of it. We don't see it with our own eyes, but our soul sees it. And that's why Hanukkah is different from any other holiday, because it represents the light of the future. That light that was hidden after the first day of creation, God said this is not good for everyone to have access to. If everyone had access to seeing the whole world, thieves would have a field day. They would be able to see where all the treasures are hidden, and they would be able to make good of that. So God says, this light is going to be hidden. I'm going to hide it in the Torah. If someone masters the Torah the way the holiest of people do, they have access to this light, to some of this light at least, and they can see things in a different way than we can. But everyone will be exposed to this light in the Messianic age. We all get a taste of that light on Hanukkah. So that's why Hanukkah is not a minor holiday. On the contrary, it's a major holiday in terms of its spiritual quality. That's point number one. Point number two, the name Hanukkah. What does the word Hanukkah mean? Hanukkah means dedication. This is the day they rededicated the temple. When the Syrian Greeks took over the temple, they turned it into a pagan temple. They desecrated it, they defiled it, and when the Maccabees, the heroes of Hanukkah, came back into the temple after they defeated the Syrian Greeks at battle, they had to rededicate the temple. They had to clean it, they had to cleanse it, purify it, and rededicate it. That's why Hanukkah is called Hanukkah. But there's also another meaning of the word Hanukkah. Hanukkah is actually a composite of two words, two Hebrew words. Chanu, Chav Hei. Chav Hei is the number 25. Chanu means they encamped. The Maccabees and the Jews that followed them were fighting really heavy-duty battles with the Syrian Greeks. When they finally defeated them, The next day, after the defeat, they encamped. It means that they rested. They were no longer fighting. So Chanukah commemorates not the actual military victory when it happened, but the day afterwards when they were no longer fighting. And that has a very powerful lesson. Sometimes we have to fight wars, and right now, tragically, Israel is engaged in a war against those enemies who'd like to extinguish the light of Israel. We're not going to celebrate the day of the defeat. We're going to celebrate the day after the defeat when we no longer have to fight, because we are not about fighting. I once remarked, and this is a thing that you can see it clearly, that although Israel is probably the most militaristic country, where everyone there is a soldier, it's not a militant country. People hate the idea of having to fight. They know they have to for survival, but they are it's anathema to them. It's just distasteful, the whole idea of having to fight and having to kill. We celebrate the day that we rested. Why? Because the day that we are fighting, we can't live as Jews because we're fighting. We can't observe everything. Although it's interesting how the soldiers in Gaza, at any free moment they have, are lighting the Hanukkah menorahs. They're erecting Hanukkah menorahs. They're lighting it and bringing some of the spiritual light into the battlefield. But many of them are putting on tefillin. Many of them are praying. But it still cannot be the same as they would do it when there would be peace. We're going to celebrate the period of peace because that is the enabler for doing what it is that a Jew does. Hanukkah celebrates the miracle. But which miracle do we focus on? There were two miracles. The miracle of the victory. We were few in the hands of many. We defeated a superior military force. The Greeks at one battle had about 100,000 soldiers. They were well equipped. They were well trained. We had a group of maybe a few thousand Maccabees who were ill-equipped and ill-trained, and we defeated them. That was a major miracle, and everyone saw that miracle. No one expected the Jews to win that battle. But we don't celebrate that, it seems. We celebrate the second miracle, which very few people saw, that when we enter the temple and we discover that the menorah could not be lit with the olive oil, because the olive oil was defiled, contaminated by the Syrian Greeks. And they only found one cruse, one jar of oil that had enough to last for one night, because in the menorah in the temple, they would light it before sunset, and it would burn all night long. And they had enough for one night, but it would take them 8 days before they would have the ability to replenish their supply. And they only had enough for one night. So instead of burning one night, the miracle was that it lasted for 8 nights. Now, how many people saw that miracle? Only the priests, because otherwise people who are not priests were not allowed into the sanctuary. And how many priests were there that were involved in lighting the menorah? You only really need one priest to do it all. So there might have been a few others, maybe a few dozen people, maybe a few hundred people. And yet that's the miracle that we commemorate. Why? Because we're not about military victories. That's not what defines us. We need them. When you're fighting a war, you need a victory, and you celebrate it, you're thankful to God for it. But the focus, the emphasis is on the light, because the light is the metaphor for God, it's the metaphor for Torah, it's the metaphor for the mitzvot, the commandments, it's a metaphor for our soul. That's what we accentuate on Hanukkah. Point number 3. In the beginning of Genesis, the Torah tells us that in the beginning God created the creation of heaven and earth, and everything was chaos, and there was darkness. So the Midrash says that all those descriptions of the way the world was before the light are descriptions of the various exiles that the Jewish people would have to endure. And the word v'choshech, and darkness, refers to the Syrian Greek exile, when we were under the dominion of the Greeks. Actually, we're not the Greeks, they were the Syrian Greeks, but what's the difference? It's the same culture. We were under their domination, and that was the darkness. And then when God said, let there be light, that refers to Hanukkah. And again, as I said before, the word light is the 25th word of the Torah, corresponding to the 25th day of the month. In other words, Greek culture is described as our sages as darkness. Now, Western civilization is based on Greek culture. You had Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and all the others, Hippocrates, and all the other great Greeks who introduced us to philosophy, to mathematics, to science, to literature, to poetry. They were the most cultured people, and yet our sages said, you know what, you're darkness. And we're seeing that right now. Look at Harvard, the most elite university in the world, perhaps, and it's the darkest place in the world today. In some ways, it's worse than Hamas, because Hamas does not come in the name of intellect. It doesn't come in the name of culture. It doesn't come in the name of enlightenment. It doesn't come in the name of modernity, of advancement. It's medieval. Hamas. It's the same. There's no difference between them and the Almohades who conquered Spain and Morocco, and Maimonides had to flee 800 years ago, and they killed anyone who didn't profess to be a Muslim. Hamas is no better, maybe even worse. They don't speak in the name of modernity, but Harvard and the other universities that can't even get to say that talking about murdering all the Jews in the world is at least bullying, and they couldn't say it, that's pure, unmitigated darkness. And that's what Hanukkah defeats. So it's not an accident that this event, that hearing in the Congress with I was about to say Hamas, but it's worse than Hamas, with Harvard, occurs on Hanukkah to tell us, look how dark intellectual secularism could go. The Syrian Greeks were pagan intellectuals, and that's what the modern scholars, I'm generalizing because there are many exceptions to the rule. There are many fine people at Harvard, of course, and there are many good people at Harvard who take issue with this, but as an institution, it's darkness, and Hanukkah is here to bring light, to get rid of that darkness. Hanukkah is mostly about lighting the menorah. In Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, it's called the Chanukiah, but it was always referred to as either menorah and less so as Chanukiah. But I'll use the word menorah. I'm used to using that word. I once got berated by an Israeli for using the word menorah. He says, no, a menorah is the 7-branched one, and a Chanukiah is the 8-branched one. Well, he's right, and he's also wrong, because the menorah refers to both, the 7-branched one and the 8-branched one. But that's semantics. Where do we place the menorah? So in the original story of Hanukkah, when they instituted lighting the menorah, it was instituted to be lit at the entrance of your home, towards the outside, where you put your mezuzah on the right side of the doorpost as you enter, and the Hanukkah menorah was placed on the left side. So when you would walk through the doorway, you would be surrounded by a mezuzah on the right and the Hanukkah menorah on the left. That is no longer the practice, although in Israel, many people do that till this day. But the reason why it changed is because of migration of Jews to Europe. In Europe, as in America, as in Buffalo, when you light your menorah, it turns out to be winter. And in winter, if you light your menorah outside, the flame is not going to last very long. And also, when Jews moved to Europe and they lived amongst the non-Jews, anti-Semites would not tolerate Jews lighting their menorahs outside. They would either extinguish the flames, which was common. The Talmud even relates that there were times when Jews had to light the menorahs inside because the various sects of pagans would be upset that Jews were lighting their menorah, and they would come and extinguish it. So they moved the menorah indoors. We're indoors. So there are two customs. One custom, that seems to be the most widespread custom, is to light it in your window. Why the window? Because the purpose of lighting the menorah outside was in order to publicize the miracle. That people should see, oh, there's a menorah, there's a flame burning. What's the reason for it? Oh, there was a miracle. So instead of doing it at the doorway where you cannot do it without the wind extinguishing the flame, you do it in your window, but everyone could see it. That's one custom. There's another custom, which is more in the Hasidic community, we follow this custom, is to take the menorah and put it at the doorpost inside the home, where you have a mezuzah on your right, because we put mezuzahs on every door, and you have the menorah on the left. So we're surrounded, mezuzah on the right, and the menorah on the left. What's the symbolism over there? Why the menorah on the left? There's actually an opinion of the Talmud that says to put the menorah on the right, because Judaism always accentuates the right side. When you do a mitzvah, you give charity, you should do it with your right hand if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, you do it with your left hand because that's your right hand. You do it with a stronger arm. Why do we put the menorah on the left and not on the right? So one explanation is the whole objective of lighting the menorah outside, or at least towards the outside, is not just to publicize the miracle, but also to change the outside. The outside is a metaphor for things that are outside the pale of goodness, of holiness, of godliness. The street is a place where everything goes. You can have every idea, every crazy idea or practice. It's a public domain. It's open to everyone. Your home is your private domain. It's your place where you can live in the most pure and holy way. The purpose of the Hanukkah menorah is to illuminate the darkness of the street, to get rid of the darkness, and not the physical darkness, but the spiritual darkness, which is associated with the left. In Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, based on earlier sources, the right is the hand with which we give. So it's a symbol of, and a metaphor for, revealed godliness, where you could see God giving. The left hand, which is usually the weaker hand for right-handed people, is the hand in which you don't give. You don't use your hand to give. So it symbolizes withholding goodness, withholding holiness, concealing holiness. So the Hanukkah menorah is placed on the left because the purpose is to not just allow the left to not encroach itself and not allow itself to enter into our homes. That's what the Mezuzah does. The Mezuzah protects the negative forces from entering your home. The Mezuzah is a protection because the Mezuzah identifies your home as a home under the God's dominion. That's what the Mezuzah contains, among other things, the Shema, which declares your belief in one God. So the Mezuzah says, you're not conforming to the idea of one God. You have other alien ideas. You can't come in. The Mezuzah is like the bouncer standing at the door of your homes and saying, you don't belong in this bar. Get out. There's no room for you. But the Hanukkah menorah takes it a step further. It says, no, we're going to even change the street. We're going to illuminate the darkness outside. Even the outside, even the left, even the negative forces will no longer be able to operate. They will disappear, or better still, they will be transformed. So the Mezuzah and the Hanukkah menorah complement each other. The Mezuzah prevents negative influences from entering your home. The Hanukkah menorah gets rid of the negative influences outside. So that's why they have a complementary relationship. Point number 5. The miracle of Hanukkah is, as I said before, they only found one cruse of oil. What happened to all the rest of the oil? It was contaminated. But Jewish law allows you to use contaminated oil when you have nothing else. The Talmud makes that clear, that in the event that you don't have any other oil, the only oil you have is contaminated oil, and you have to light the menorah, because they lit the menorah not just 8 days a year, they lit it every single night of the year, without exception. And if you don't have any other oil, you're allowed to use contaminated oil. That's a compromise the Torah sanctions. So then why didn't the Jews use the other oil? Why did they need a miracle? So the commentators explain, because the Jews said, we're sick and tired of dealing with contaminated oil, with contaminated darkness. We don't want compromises, even a compromise that is kosher. Sometimes you have to compromise. When two people go to court, Jewish law says the ideal outcome would be if they could compromise, because compromise will promote the peace. So sometimes to promote peace, we allow compromises and we encourage compromises. But there are times when a person says, I'm sick and tired, I'm in a love affair with God. I don't want to compromise my relationship with God. God will understand if we compromise, but we're saying we don't want it. We don't want to give less than everything we have for God. If you're in love with someone, you're not going to try to compromise your relationship and find excuses for it. Yes, there are many excuses that are legitimate excuses. If you forget your anniversary, you can find an excuse for it, but something is missing in that relationship. Leah, did I forget our something is missing. That's a bad example, but it's an example. The idea is that when you're in a love affair, you want to do things in the most perfect way, in the most unadulterated way. And that's why the Jews said, we don't want to use contaminated oil. Yes, God says, well, accept it. I won't love you any less, but we won't accept it because we don't want to give anything but everything. We want to give all we have. And God responded also in performing a miracle that wasn't really necessary. Because, again, God says you could use any oil you want. God says, look, you gave all that you have. You didn't want to rely on a compromise. I will not compromise with you. I will give you everything. This will not be half serious, but I once heard someone explain about a mezuzah. How do we place the mezuzah? We put it on a diagonal, on a slant, slight slant. Why do we do it on a slant? Because there's an opinion that says you should put the mezuzah vertically. Another opinion says you should put it horizontally. So we compromise, and we put it on a slant. It's not totally horizontal, it's not totally vertical, so it accommodates both opinions. And someone once said, that's why we put the mezuzah on the doorpost of our homes, as if to say that in a relationship, in a family, you have to compromise. Husbands and wives have to compromise to each other. If that's the message of the mezuzah, and I don't accept that message, but if that's the message that people think a mezuzah is, about compromising in your relationships, because in a real relationship, it's not 50-50, it's 100, each spouse gives the other 100. But if that's what people accept, that it's a compromise, the Hanukkah menorah says, no, that's not what Judaism is about. It's not about compromise. Yes, sometimes you have to compromise, but that's not the ideal. Point number 6. The Syrian Greeks were not just professors in an elite university preaching secular ideas. They imposed it with an army. The Syrian Greeks banned Judaism, and they started with 3 things. The first thing they started with was circumcision. Circumcision was punished by death if you circumcised your child. Shabbos observance, resting on Shabbos, was punishable by death. And Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, today is Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month. What is significant about Rosh Chodesh? The first of every Jewish month is a semi-holiday. You could call it a minor holiday, where they would bring special offerings in the temple, and the holidays of that month are determined by when the first of the month occurred. And that was based on the sighting of the moon. So in other words, the Jewish calendar system was banned by the Syrian Greeks. Why were they so much against these 3 things? Shabbos we can understand because it's a day of rest. In those days, the concept of a day of rest didn't exist. Society has to go on. We have to continue. We have to build. We have to contribute to the world. We can't take a day off. Yeah, if someone needs a day off because they're not well, that's one thing, but to make a collective day off where everyone rests, that was anathema to them. Okay, we can understand that. But why were they against circumcision? Why would they care if I circumcise my boys foreskin on the 8th day of his life. So there were 3 reasons why circumcision was so negative to them in their understanding. Number 1, circumcision was done to the body. It cut off a part of the anatomy. The Syrian Greeks worshipped the human body. To them, the human body was a piece of art. When they had to compete in the sports, they would compete in the nude because they glorified and worshipped the human body. And here, to mutilate the body to them was wrong. That's one reason. Another reason is that the purpose of circumcision is to declare that this child belongs to the Jewish people and is different from everyone else, is not part of the rest of society in every respect. We have a unique mission. We are part of a chosen people, special responsibilities, special privileges, special status in our relationship with God. That was something they couldn't tolerate. You mean to tell me that Jews are not part of society? You can't integrate, you can't assimilate? They were all for assimilation, and when Jews would physically demonstrate that they are not part of assimilation, that was something they couldn't tolerate. And the third reason is, and perhaps this is the most important reason, with whom do we perform circumcision? With an 8-day-old child. The child doesn't understand what's happening to it. We're not giving the child a choice. We're doing something that is not based on logic and rationality, because if it was based on logic and rationality, we would do it to an adult. Someone who can understand, someone who can be explained what it is all about, what its meaning is, what is it a representation of. There are many explanations for circumcision that could be given, but no, circumcision is something that transcends logic and reason. But the reason we do it with an 8-day-old baby is to say that Judaism is not just about logic. Yes, we are very rational people, and we're very rational in understanding the things that we do, but we're also trans-rational. We transcend rationality. Our commitment to God transcends our understanding. And the Greeks who worshipped logic and rationality couldn't tolerate the idea of circumcision. Furthermore, circumcision occurs on the 8th day. What's the significance of the 8th day? Why the 8th day? Because 7 is the cycle of nature. Anything that exists in the world of nature can be fit into the cycle of 7. 8 means it transcends nature. It transcends logic. So the very nature of circumcision is something transcendent, and they didn't accept that. Why were they against Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month? Because unlike calendars that are based on astronomy, astronomical reality, and you can't change it, Rosh Chodesh was fluid. If the witnesses came to say that they saw the sighting of the moon last night, then Rosh Chodesh would be declared today. But let's say it was a cloudy night and there were no witnesses to come, then Rosh Chodesh would be postponed to the next day, and that determined time. In other words, we were given the power to make a difference in changing the natural cycle of time. That was something that they couldn't grasp, they couldn't comprehend.
Excuse me. If today cloud here, but a couple of miles from here, no cloud.
Right, but the witnesses who came to Jerusalem had to testify about what they saw, and it was determined based on what they saw or didn't see. And that was something they couldn't comprehend. How it could be that a group of Jews decide time, when the calendar should begin and when it should not begin. Point number 7, Jews love to ask questions. We even answer a question with a question, and why not? What's wrong with answering a question with a question? Why do we love questions? Because questions get us to discover the truth. If we never ask questions and we're always just listening to what we hear and we don't question it, will have a very superficial understanding of the subject. Questions are like climbing a ladder. It's not easy to climb, but the more you climb, the higher you go. The more questions we ask, the deeper we go in understanding the topic. There's no subject in Judaism that has as many questions as Hanukkah. And there's one question, I wrote a book, only published the first part of it, where I decided I'm going to collect all the questions that were asked about Hanukkah. And since the word ner, which means candle, adds up to 250, I thought I would find 250 questions. And I wasn't sure I'd be able to find 250 questions. When I found the 250 questions, I regretted I didn't look for nerot, which is 656, because there are probably hundreds of more that I didn't put in the book. And the first volume has the answer to 61 questions. But we like to ask questions, but there's one question that has more answers than any other question that has ever been asked in history, perhaps. It's a Hanukkah question that was asked the first time about 750 years ago by a rabbi called Menachem HaMeiri. Meiri means the one who gives off light. So his title was Light, and he asked a question about the light. And later on, the question was asked again, who didn't know the original one who asked the question, by Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Code of Jewish Law. And his name, Yosef, also connects to Hanukkah. Yosef means to increase. And on Hanukkah, we increase. We add another candle every night. But what's the question? That's my question now. What's the question? The question is, why do we observe Hanukkah for 8 days when the miracle was only for 7 days? They had enough oil for 1 day. So why light a menorah for 8? Well, 8 days when you had enough oil for 1. There was no miracle the first night. That's the question, and there are literally hundreds of answers. I have one book that has 100 answers to the question. I saw a book that I don't have yet that has 500 answers to the question. And I heard that there was a great Hasidic rabbi known as the Kloisenberger Rebbe, who every night of Hanukkah for decades probably would give a new answer to the question. And my question is, why are people looking for new answers? If there's so many answers already, why are they looking for new answers? That I'll try to answer that question later. But the answer I'll share some of the answers. One answer is that the first night we're actually celebrating and commemorating the military victory. But we do it with light to emphasize that the military victory in and of itself doesn't really warrant a celebration. It only warrants celebration because it leads to light. Just winning a battle doesn't really get you very far because you didn't really accomplish anything positive. You just got rid of something negative. You want that your defeat of your enemy should lead to more increased light. So that's the first answer. A second answer is that the fact that they found 1 cruse of oil in and of itself was a miracle, because the oil was stored in one chamber. There was a special chamber in the temple where they stored all the oil. And the Syrian Greeks knew where that was. They contaminated it. How did they find a cruse of oil in a part of the temple that was never used for hiding oil? And the Syrian Greeks went through and rummaged through the whole temple. How could it be they didn't find it? That itself was a miracle. But it has more significance than just that. It means that there's a certain part of every one of us, a cruse of oil deep down, no matter how bad we may think we are, no matter how many mistakes we make in our lives, we should never forget the fact that there's always a part of us deep down in our soul that's pure and cannot be contaminated. The negative forces can't reach it, can't discover it, and can't harm it. That's the essence of that's why it was sealed with the seal of the high priest. In every one of us, there's a high priest. There's a deeper part of our consciousness that can't be contaminated. Another answer is that when the Maccabees liberated the temple, they not only liberated the temple, they also rescinded the decrees, and Jews were allowed to circumcise their sons. And since circumcision occurs on the 8th day, they made Hanukkah an 8-day holiday to commemorate the fact that we now are allowed to circumcise our sons. That's just a few of the many answers. Another, just will share one more answer, that they actually saw the miracle the first day, because in the morning when they would go to the menorah, they would see the menorah would be empty. The oil would have been consumed. When they came in the morning, after they lit the menorah for the first time, they looked at the menorah, they saw the menorah was still filled with oil. That means that there was a miracle the very first night. The final 8th point, how do we light the menorah? We light 1 candle the first night, 2 candles the second night, and we go in increasing order from 1 to 8. That's one opinion, the school of Hillel. And by the way, the word Hillel, the name of the sage, actually relates to another Hebrew word that means light. So his very name suggests light. The school of Shammai says, no, you start off with 8, and you light 7 the next night, and 6 the next night, and the last night you light 1. So you either go in ascending order or in descending order. We follow the school of Hillel. We go in ascending order. What's the reason? So the Talmud says, because in matters of holiness, you always want to increase. You always want to add more. You never want to stay in one place. Just like economically, no country says, the economy is going fine, we're not going to try to increase. No business is going to say, I'm making a good living, why should I add more to my business, add more employees and make more money? In every area, my health is fine, it's good. Why can't I make it better? Why shouldn't everyone wants their lives to increase and get better and better? Why should matters of holiness and goodness be any difference? The school of Shammai says, no, we find a precedent that on the holiday of Sukkot, which is an 8-day holiday, and some people say that that's why they made Hanukkah an 8-day holiday, because it was a belated celebration of Sukkot. That's another answer. And Sukkot, they would bring offerings every day, and they did it in descending order. The first day, they bring 13 offerings. The second day, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. No, not 5, 3, 2, 1. Until 7. A total of 70 offerings. So we have a precedent where it would go in descending orders. But what's the deeper meaning between these two opinions? The two opinions reflect the power of fire. Fire brings light, but it also does something else. It consumes. We have 2 areas in life that we have to work on. We have to work on the positive energy. We have to work on fighting negative energy. Unfortunately, the world has plenty of negative energy in it. If we focus on the positive, then you always want to increase. If you focus on the negative, if you start off with fighting negative, then there's less negative to fight the next day. You go in descending order. Hillel, whose name represents light, he focuses on adding light. And that's the message for us today. The best way to deal with everything that's going on in the world is by increasing our own light, to do one more mitzvah, one more act of goodness, one more act of kindness, one more ritual that brings us closer to God. But the school of Shammai says, no, Shammai, the word Shammai comes from the word evaluation, judgment. Shammai is a judge. Judges judge criminal behavior. To get rid of criminal behavior, he focuses on fighting the evil. And he says, therefore, the first night, there's a lot of evil in the world. You have to put all your forces together. You throw in an 8. The next night, there's not as much evil left. So you do 7, and the last night you do 1. That's the rationale behind these two opinions. And to conclude on one note, that the great Kabbalist, the Ari, lived 500 years ago, close to 500 years ago, said that in the Messianic age, we will follow the school of Shammai. Because now we can't deal with evil effectively. We have to focus on doing positive. Every mitzvah that we do has more power than any army could muster in fighting the evil. You have to fight evil nowadays as well, but the focus should always be on accentuating the positive. In the Messianic age, we will be empowered to actually get rid of all evil, and it'll be a process of diminishing returns. We're constantly going to be chipping off the powers of evil, so at the last night of Hanukkah, we won't need more than 1. Any questions?
Just wish to point out, talking about one of the reasons why we light candles inside is because of dread. Yesterday in Poland, we had a politician that went with a fire extinguisher to one of the menorahs and
Yeah.
he sprayed them out. While he was doing it, somebody got hurt actually. So, nothing new. Nothing's changed actually. He's a member of Congress, he wasn't just a child, a lunatic.
Well, we see that how the evil people want to extinguish our fire. They can't handle that we're bringing light into the world.
The other question is, on the question, why does this question of this verse merit so many answers?
Right. That was my question. Why are people so
You need 500.
right? Why are people so anxious about the difference between making it a 7-day or an 8-day holiday? Because I think we're all craving for 8.
Huh?
We all are craving for the number 8 because 8 is associated with Mashiach. It says Mashiach is one of 8 great leaders. And it says when King David used to play the kinnor, which they translate as harp, but I'm sure it couldn't have been a harp, it had 7 strands. Harps have many more than 7. How many does the cello have?
4.
4. Any instrument that has 7?
Guitar.
Guitar has 7 strands? Yeah?
No, it's guitar with 6 string and 7.
Okay, so King David's instrument had 7. It says Mashiach's instrument will have 8. It's not just an add in another strand. It means there'll be a new dynamic, a dynamic of 8, of transcendence. We'll transcend the norm, the average. The norm is not always positive. So people are asking the question, why 8? Because they're craving to get to this 8. And they're looking for all different ways of reaching it. That's my explanation. And I'm sure there are others who will give other explanations.
So many questions, particular kashas. This kasha was getting so much attention today still. People still answering the question.
Yeah.
Something special.
So they've been doing 8 for thousands of years?
8 days of Hanukkah.
Okay.
Well, for 2,400 years, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Approximately.
No, more day vacation in school.
Good thing.
People like vacation.
Right? That's right.
But when you talk about Greek military, they don't give to menorahs and Hanukkah and circumcision and exactly Soviet Union.
Right. Soviet Union followed that example. It's
Soviet Union don't follow too much Greek.
no, but that banning Judaism, outlawing Jewish practice. Yeah. In the Soviet Union, you couldn't circumcise your son. I know a rabbi. I met him. I knew his son, and I know his grandsons. Rabbi Betzalel Vilshansky. He was a mohel in the Soviet Union. And one day he's walking down the street, and he's kidnapped. He's blindfolded. They drag him into a car, and they drove for a few hours. They take him out of the car into a house. They take off his blindfold, circumcise our son. These were Soviet officials who were Jewish, who wanted a bris for their sons, but they were afraid obviously to do it, and they didn't want he should know where he was. And then after he did the bris, they blindfolded him again, put him into the car, and drove him back.
But they took off the blindfold.
I remember.
Yeah. Well, he could have done it with 2 hands tied behind his back.
What's that?
You had rehearsal